My dealer, I don't have to go down to the drugstore. I don't have to go down to the liquor store. My dealer lives in my mind. My dealer lives in my hand. My dealer lives in my bathroom. My dealer lives in my fridge. My dealer lives at my church. If I turn to my dealer, even for 1 minute, it's on. No sex with self or anyone other than the spouse to whom you're married. For me, sexual sobriety is no porn, no sex with self, which is masturbation, and no sex outside of my marriage. Trying to learn how to see women as women and not as sex objects. Recovery's given me a lot of great things. When I'm in a room of recovery, whether it's an in-person room or a virtual room, I'm home.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Justin. Justin, thank you so much for being my guest today on this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. Before we get to your introduction, just a quick announcement. We're doing something a bit different and a bit exciting today. This is my first remote recording. Justin is in the States, and we are also having our first recording where I am not dealing with someone who is a primary alcoholic. I think I'm okay with saying that. We'll get to that in a moment. But just to say, this is going to be a little bit different, and I'm excited to get going. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Silvio. My name is Justin. I am a son of an all-powerful, all-loving God and a recovering addict to sex. I'm a sex addict. And I'm grateful to be here today. One of the things that I have also felt a little bit hesitant in is that, hey, I don't identify primarily as an alcoholic or a drug addict, but as I have worked the program and as I've spoken with hundreds of addicts of all varieties, I have learned more and more that the core of the addiction is pretty much the same no matter what the affliction is, what the outcome is. And I'm grateful to be walking this path as I identify with the disease of alcoholism very closely.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. You may have, to the listeners, you may have recognized Justin's voice. Of course, he has a whole host of amazing podcasts, the Rico 12 family. We'll have a quick word about that at the end of the recording, Justin. I think it's time for us to get started with our 12 questions. So let's get straight to question 1, which is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that, Silvio, and I'm excited to go into this. A lot of times I look at these things and I figure, as I look back at my childhood, I had a fairly idyllic childhood. I had loving parents who were married and still are married to this day. I had 3 sisters. I was the oldest of the 3. But as I look back at things, what I grew up as is someone that felt I was pressed into absolute excellence and needing to be perfect in every aspect of my life. And I knew very early on that I was not perfect, that I had some things that were broken inside of me, but I did not think I was allowed to express those things. So through all of my childhood, I think the trauma that I experienced, while not necessarily, abuse or anything like that, was that I just couldn't measure up. And on top of that, not measuring up, I was and still am a very short person and small stature-wise. And I was very insecure in that throughout my whole life and felt I had to put out this persona of, I call it short man syndrome. I have short man syndrome. I will do anything to prove to anyone that I am still capable, no matter how short or tall or whatever I am. And that led to a whole lot of, fights, a whole lot of attitude and just feelings of rejection and being bullied. And I think that's kind of where I come from with childhood traumatic experiences.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because there are, first and foremost, I'm also not the tallest, so maybe there's a different podcast there to be had eventually. But I think there is what I'd like to call overt trauma, right? When we speak about adverse childhood experiences, what you were saying there, there's abuse, there is, violence, and abuse of all other kinds. And there is the sort of less overt adverse childhood experience, which, like you were saying, and this is something I can relate to as well, is expectations is a really big one. So it sounds to me like you grew up in a really pressurized environment.
Yeah, that's how I kind of describe things when I go through my story with people, is that I had to be perfect. Even though life inside our home was not perfect, at least living on the inside. From the outside, everybody looked around and said, "Oh, look at that family. They've got their crap together. They know what they are doing, and they are where they're supposed to be and looking how they're supposed to be." And inside, it just wasn't that way, but I felt the pressure to express that at all costs, that everything's perfect, no matter how I felt.
And was there ever a time maybe where the fact that you weren't quote-unquote perfect, that you weren't fulfilling this expectation, where that came to the fore? And if it did, what would happen?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific time. I can only think of like feelings, emotions that I had when I fell short of that I wasn't making my mom or my dad or my grandparents proud. If they knew what was going on in my mind and in my actions behind closed doors, they would be ashamed of me and disown me and say, "You're just not part of the family anymore. You're out." And so I think most of those feelings were self-imposed, and I made sure that everything was a secret. As a sex addict, nobody knew anything except me and my victims at those times.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? Now, when you're coming from a sort of alcohol and drugs background like I do, there's usually around this time there's a big party phase, which you may have had anyway, but there's a big party phase that is present, where you start trying stuff out and you find that whatever it is that you're using can do things for you that you can't do for yourself. So let's get to this question. What did the moment you first got hooked, the fun times, look like, and how it is appropriate with regards to sex addiction?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So I'm going to go back and share a little bit of my story and what built to it to get to that point. I was 6 years old, and I was playing out in a vacant field behind my house. There was an irrigation ditch back there, frogs and snakes, and I was being a 6-year-old just having a good old time. And I stumbled across someone's discarded magazine, adult magazine. And while for many people that wouldn't be a big thing in their life, the first image I saw is still burned in my head. It is there, and it is something that as soon as I saw it, I thought, what is this? I love it. I need it. And if I tell anybody that I have it, they're going to take it from me, and I won't be able to enjoy this. And so I went and I hid it in my closet as like a 6-year-old kid. I'm not going to tell my mom. No way. She's going to take that away from me. And from that moment, as I look back, I started seeing women differently. Beforehand, they were women. They were like my mom, they were just people that I didn't see anywhere. And all of a sudden I started seeing them differently and objectifying people, my teachers, my, people around at church, in the community, whatever. I started seeing them differently and objectifying them. And then when I was about 11, a cool kid moved into the neighborhood, and this guy, he was my age, he was in my class at school, but as an 11-year-old, his voice was already starting to change. He was far progressed beyond me in terms of maturity, and I just wanted to be like him. He was strong, he was big, he was, all of these things, and he was cool. He had long hair and just was a rebel, and I just wanted to be like him. And one day he invited me over to his house after school, and I was like, heck yeah, go over, I'll be the cool kid. And he introduced me to the concept of masturbation, and that's where the party started. I all of a sudden went, wow, I can't live a minute without this. I can't. And from that moment on, every single waking or sleeping moment I had was, how can I next act out? How can I next get this high? How can I next experience something new that sexually that I just needed. And I think that's where the party phase started. Now, I was still very, like I said, on the outside, I had to look like this clean-cut, church-going, whatever, perfect person. But on the inside, and my mind was very much a sewer and a pit of darkness and gross. So, yeah, that's kind of where the party phase started and where it went.
You know, I don't think that 12, 13, 14-year-old boys do much else but masturbation, right? In that, I think there's a part that is just normal and healthy and so on. What I find interesting here is that you speak of if I understand this correctly, you speak of an obsession really from a really early age, which is, I suppose, somewhat different to what I experienced. I mean, it's a fine line, I suppose, and what do you know when you're 13 or something. But looking back in hindsight from the way you're speaking, this was clearly something you could relate to later in life as being part of your obsession.
Yeah, and you know, like you said, I don't think that most young people who experiment with masturbation and have those thoughts and those experiences become addicted necessarily. But for whatever reason, I was wired that, I mean, as soon as that happened, that was the only thing in life that ever mattered, ever. And I would just ditch out on everything. I'd miss out on everything in order to achieve those highs, in order to, take bigger risks in that. And as I mentioned, I was a small guy. My voice didn't change until after my 10th grade in school. I was 16 years old before my voice ever changed. It was not a hormone thing. It had nothing to do with hormones. And that's something that as I look back at, I go, man, how did this all happen before hormones were ever even around, in my body?
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's some interesting things that I look at and I go, this is normal, or is it? It's not for me.
No, absolutely. It must have been a heck of it must have been a really difficult thing to hide and live with. If I think about large parts of, or most of my addiction really was when I was away from my parents and I didn't sort of have to look straight in the mornings and evenings, or, you know what I mean? I felt that there was just enough leeway for me to be able to hide things. One of the reasons why I came into recovery, I guess, quite late, at 48, one of the reasons for that is because I was able to hide for a long, long time. I'd have thought that when you're a 15, 16-year-old kid and you have this inner thing going on, it must have been incredibly difficult to hide.
It was painful. But I hid it at all costs, at least in my home, and in my community, my faith community, and everything. I hid it at all costs, and everybody around me that was not directly involved in my acting out behaviors thought I was this great guy with amazing potential. And that's like I said, going back to it, that's where this really, I think this illness really set in, as I had to live up to that, what everybody thought I was, that image. And but I had a group of friends, great friends, as a teenager, who would always say, "Hey, Justin, you're sick. You're a pervert." And they'd say stuff like that, and I'd just kind of laugh it off. Whatever, I'm just like everybody else. But I would say things and make references to girls and women as they'd go by, and my friends would be like, "Dude, what is wrong with you?" So, yeah, there were some things that couldn't be hidden by those who were around me when I was more real than when I was in my home.
Yeah, interesting. And do you find then, if I understand this correctly, that the fact that everybody thought of you as this great guy, and that which sort of emphasized a double life almost, right? That this was an accelerant, that one was sort of feeding into the other?
I think so, and I think it really came down to, I think shame was the accelerant, because I knew I was not the same person. I knew that I had to live, I knew that in the public eye I had to be this way, and I knew that in private I was not. And that one of those two, or both of those two, were nothing but masks of what was really there, and I didn't know what was really there, and it just, for me, it just fueled things.
Sure.
And helped them spiral out of control.
And how did it progress from there? I mean, question 3 is, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom, and I caveat this almost every time now, is that not everybody has a rock bottom, or you may have many, and so on. But if we're talking about progression, and of course, with alcohol and drugs, the progression is really visible, right? And depending on which drugs you use in particular, it can go very, very quickly. And it's extremely visible, and so might be your rock bottom. Now, how was your progression? Because it is also a progressive illness, I take it.
Absolutely. It is a progressive illness, and it only gets worse, never better. And the progression for me, while it was semi-restrained in comparison to some other sex addicts that I know, it was mostly restrained, I think, because of this image that I felt I had to portray everywhere else. As I got older, I was put in more and more service type positions, leadership type positions in my faith. I was asked to do different things, and on the outside, I felt I have to be at least put together enough to do these things. So it kept me from a lot of the other places that a lot of sex addicts go to. Gratefully, and I say this with a massive amount of humility now, to this point, I have not yet gone outside, physically acting out outside of my marriage. I haven't gone to prostitutes or anything like that yet. Yep. But I know this is a progressive disease. And I think the only thing that has kept me from that, like I said, is the desire to want to be the person that people saw me as. And the rock bottom really was when my wife found out. We had been married 10 years before she knew.
Wow.
I was dishonest with her. I was dishonest with everybody. And we had been married 10 years. And finally one day I came home after a church meeting and I just said, I am dying. I need to get this out. And I said to my wife, I'm struggling. And this is my story. And I shared it with her. And it crushed her. It crushed her. And at that moment, gratefully, she started to get support. She started going to 12-step rooms. I was not willing to do that. No way. No way was I willing to do that. She started going to like Anon rooms right away, and she started finding healing for herself. Now, my rock bottom came about probably 7 years later after that, because I still wasn't. I was just trying harder, willpower, basically stuff, you know, and it was not working. But she came to me one day and she said, you know, Justin, and this is where it really hit me. And this is going to sound like a strange rock bottom to some, but for me, this was very powerful. She came to me, she said, you know, Justin, if at the end of this life I'm hanging out with God and you're not with me, I'll be sad, but I will be okay because God takes way better care of me than you do. And for a proud short man syndrome guy who's putting a roof over your head and food on your table, taking care of the kids and all these things, and on the outside looks like a great guy, that was a punch in the gut. And I went, I'll show you. And I'm going to triple my efforts to make this happen. And I couldn't do it. And that was my rock bottom. No matter how much I tried, no matter what things I tried on my own, it wasn't going to work. And I finally said, okay, I am here crawling on my belly. What do I need to do? So that was my rock bottom.
It's a really impressive rock bottom, actually, I think, because if you think about it, if the person you share your life with says that to you, you also think about what it must have taken that person to get to that point, right? The emotional pain that we put our loved ones through really shines through there, I think, you know. So if you don't mind me asking, and there are, as ever, you don't have to answer this, but I'm just sort of for identification also, maybe for those who are listening, you know. So you're an active member in your church, so that's an important bit because, of course, it ups the ante to a degree, and people are looking at you as someone to look up to, right? You have, right? There is that. You're married, so you're in a monogamous relationship, and yet you carry this thing with you. Now, you have said, right? You haven't so far, and heaven forbid, you would, but you haven't so far been with prostitutes or acted out and so on and so forth. How then did it manifest, if it didn't manifest that way?
It manifested, through pornography, through masturbation, through emotional affairs. I would have a lot of emotional and, like sex. It was before sexting, so there wasn't sexting, but like phone calls with people, and just connection with women that are not my wife, that are just not, that I wouldn't want my wife to know about,
Yeah.
And that's how the manifestation was. And that's, honestly, I still, to this day, am very blind to how easily, and it is not a bad thing to be friendly with women. It's not. It's not. But my disease takes that friendliness and twists it so quickly and so subtly to, the first thought is, I wonder what she's like in bed. The first thought is, I wonder what she looks like. I want, and trying to manipulate things subconsciously so that might happen someday if things worked out just perfectly. And even to this day, that is where my brain, where the self's will is to make those types of things happen. And it sneaks up on me, even if I'm trying to be very aware of it.
Yeah. For me, as a cocaine addict, the best avenue for me to feel myself into that position is the way I felt often, not always, but often when I did cocaine. And how my view on the world on women would shift. Now, I didn't act out either, right? But that objectification, right? Even if you're just going out, I don't know, running errands or whatever, and every woman that you meet is seen entirely and purely as a sexual object, as a fantasy object. I'd creep myself out feeling that way at that time when I was doing that, and it's sad, but it's worth saying and noting that towards the end of my using, so confused was I between that person when I was high and in that space and the hours of porn, and the person who I really am, that I didn't really know in the end who I was any longer. So I can perhaps just to a certain degree feel my way into what that must have felt like for you, and how disconcerting this must be when you don't have a trigger. Like, I knew exactly, yes, of course, it's because I took a line at 3 o'clock and then another one at 4 and another one at 4:30. The for you, it's much more fluid. It's much more fluid like that. There's no trigger.
Yeah, and that's something that I've shared in other places before, and I've written about this a little bit too. And I don't say this to say that my addiction is any worse or any different or any better or whatever than anybody else's. But my dealer, I don't have to go down to the drugstore. I don't have to go down to the liquor store. I don't have to go to the corner to meet my dealer. My dealer lives in my mind. My dealer lives in my hand. My dealer lives in my bathroom. My dealer lives in my fridge. My dealer lives at my church. My dealer lives everywhere. And I cannot escape my dealer. If I turn to my dealer, even for 1 minute, it's on.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, here you go. I got some good stuff for you, and you haven't even thought of anything today, but here you go. It's right there. And I think it's the same. The chase for a cocaine addict, and this is what I've been told, the chase for the high is every bit as powerful as the high itself. And that's how it is in my disease too. The chase, the thought of, oh, what's that going to be like, is every bit as powerful and makes me insane. That's where you get the obsession of the mind and the craving of the body. The obsession is there and right on. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Our question 4 is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? Now, often, when we get to a rock bottom, or that's, those places where we can't seem to go any further, so tough is our shame, it's so deep does it run that sometimes we don't want to be here any longer. Did you experience anything like that at all?
Yeah, well, I would never say that I seriously considered suicide, I wanted to die.
Yeah.
And I would go to bed at night saying, God, take me. I don't want to wake up in the morning. And while this is suicidal ideation, if I'm driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour and I'm going under a bridge, an overpass, I've many times thought, you know what? I could just turn the wheel here, go head on, and it would all be over. Yeah. And while I never acted on those things, I wanted to die. I thought my wife, my kids, my world would be better off without me. And I would always ask God, just take me. Either take me or take this sickness or this I didn't call it a disease then because I didn't understand it. Take this perversion from me or take me.
Yeah.
Just make me not exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that how you called it then at the time? You called it a perversion. Is that how you viewed yourself?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I viewed myself as a pervert, as somebody that was a sicko. And although on the outside I didn't look like the stereotypical guy in a trench coat going around flashing people or whatever, that's how I felt. I was an absolute sicko.
It must be very difficult, particularly thinking about the fact that you also have a family, and within family life to carry this sort of hidden self there must have been incredibly difficult for you.
Yeah, carrying on an image of perceived perfection and needing, not wanting. I needed that to be the case because if anybody knew anything deeper than that, they would reject me in my mind. I would be a pariah, an outcast, and that's, if I was ever a pariah or an outcast by others, I probably would have been way more serious about considering suicide and going through with it. But for whatever reason, and this may be a stumbling block for me today, people think I'm a good guy, you know? And for whatever reason, I can put on this mask even when I'm in the depths of despair and darkness, so that people think, oh, that Justin, I can trust him. I can talk to him. I can be there with him. And, you know, and I am a good guy, but man, in my sickness, I'm twisted. That good guy is manipulative, big time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot has been said on this podcast and on yours, of course, about the fact that you can be a good guy and still also very ill. And so much of our illness and indeed of recovery revolves around that, about that, what looks like a paradox really in many ways, right? Thank you, Justin. Our question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? So that brings us first and foremost maybe to what is considered sobriety for a sex addict. And from there, how did you try to get sober before finding the rooms outside of your 12-step?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And I'll give you the definition of sobriety for my fellowship, which I'll just give you what my fellowship. It's called SAL, Sex Addicts Lifeline. And the definition is no sex with self or anyone other than the spouse to whom you're married. And this includes progressive victory over lust and defines including pornography as something like that. So for me, sexual sobriety is no porn, no sex with self, which is masturbation, and no sex outside of my marriage, and includes progressive victory, trying to learn how to see women as women and not as sex objects, sure. You know, continuing this progression. That's what sexual sobriety is defined for me. I'm not going to define it for anybody else, but that's my definition. Now, what methods did I try to do this? Oh man, willpower. And man, I got great willpower in so many areas. I can muscle my way through things. Like I mentioned, you know, I got short man syndrome. Nobody's going to stop me. I'm going to prove you wrong no matter what. So I tried willpower. I tried reading all the books, all the self-help books, and paying to go to different seminars of, you know, self-mastery, self-control. If I can, let's see, what are some of the phrases? If I can If I can think it, I can achieve it. If I can believe it, I can achieve it. If I, whatever my willpower, my mind power is. And then religiously speaking, in my faith, I prayed harder. I read my scriptures harder. I went to church harder. I worshiped harder. I served harder. I did all of these things as hard and as thoroughly as I could. And it just, and in those prayers, I'd be like, God, I am trying so hard. And, I'd be squeezing, clenching my fist, gritting my teeth, closing my eyes as tight as I could. And just, I have to do this. God, just take it from me. And it would be like, but I'd be holding on with white knuckles. Take it from me so I don't have to let it go myself. And God, in my experience, is never going to pry something out of my hands. But I kept trying all of those different things for decades. I was nearly 40 when I first came into the rooms. So for decades, I was trying this. So.
And when we speak of powerlessness with regards to sex addiction, of course, this then therefore means, here you are, you're trying harder, you are trying to distract yourself, I imagine. I'm just trying to sort of draw parallels to my own experience. And you're trying all day. Like I try all day to say, okay, do you know what? I'm not going to use till 6 o'clock, or I'm not using today at all, right? And then, and I'd be doing whatever I think whatever is required in order to get me there, and I'm white knuckling, and I'm a great white knuckler, and all of that. And then in the end, my powerlessness would just overcome me. And so I'm assuming it would be the same for you then. If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Absolutely. If I, by some miracle, made it through a day without acting out in my addiction, the next morning I'd wake up and I go, I made it through a day. Let's celebrate by acting out. Yeah. And it would be all over again, And the insanity of the situation, the powerlessness, the unmanageability just continued to build and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose unmanageability within sex addiction, I'm assuming it doesn't really look all that different to unmanageability in alcoholism and drug addiction, in that, you're hiding things, you're not responsible, people can't find you when they need you, you're missing appointments, is that right?
Absolutely. Missing appointments, disappearing. I had a job at that time where I was out in the field. I had a service truck, and I was working out in the field doing service work, and I would just disappear for a whole day. People would be trying to get a hold of me. Hey, Justin, we need you on this job, and no, I'm gone. I'm getting paid for it. And that's just crazy. The unmanageability, I think, is very similar. When I'm drunk, I'm every bit as disconnected, I believe, as anybody who is literally drunk or high. I'm just disconnected from reality.
Question 6, and this is going to be interesting, is did you struggle with the word God? Now, one of the reasons why this question is in here is because, first and foremost, I suppose, because I struggled really badly with the word God when I came into the rooms. But I see this often, and of course there's a whole chapter about it in the book, and if I remember it correctly, one of the reasons why it is there is because the New York faction, they were struggling with this, whereas the people in Ohio seem to have had an easier time. I may be overly simplifying here, but in terms of the book. But nonetheless, for many people that I know, they've come at this from a position of I don't really believe in God, and there isn't much of a God, and and if he is there, then he's not nothing. He's not really anything. He's not done anything for me, right? Now you've said a few times now that you are a member of a church. You work your faith hard. I'm paraphrasing. Where did you struggle with the word God, and if you did, how? It must have had a particular slant.
Oh, this is a great question, and this is a game changer in my own recovery. I did not struggle with the word God, but I struggled with, when I introduced myself, I'm a son of an all-powerful, all-loving God. That God did not exist for me then. Yeah. It existed for everyone else, but not for me. And when I first started my steps, I remember my sponsor taking me through step 2 and 3, and I was like, I got this. I know God. This isn't a big deal to me. 5 years later, I'm 5 years into recovery, 5 years in sobriety. all of a sudden I had this wake-up call of, I don't believe that God cares about me. I am nobody. God does all these things for everybody else, but not me. And I'm sitting there preaching it at church. I've spent 2 years of my life full time telling other people about God, and yet that same God didn't care about me and was not strong enough to deliver me, was not strong enough to help me. One of the biggest things that I did in recovery was eventually I did what is called in the SA fellowship, Sexaholics Anonymous, as a step 2 inventory, where I basically fired God and hired a new God. And it was a powerful experience for me. Now, I want to go to, you said there's a whole chapter in the big book on this, We Agnostics. I want to share something that I've got in here that has been a game changer for me. It's the second paragraph on page 44 of that chapter. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. And the experience is that relying on God to deliver me from something that I cannot quit entirely when I want to, or when I start, I can't stop. I may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So once again, let me read this. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, and I add in, or religionist. If I think that God, how I understand God, is the only way God can be, I am blocking myself off every bit as much as an atheist or an agnostic. And that's where all of a sudden I went, holy crap. The God of my understanding is a small g God. I need a capital G God that can actually do this for me, not just for everybody else, but for me too. And I fired that small g God. I said, you're out of here. You no longer have a place in the corner office of my mind and my heart. You're out of here. I need to find a God that is capital G, that is strong enough, loving enough, powerful enough, caring enough, whatever, to do what I need God to do at this time. And that experience changed everything. And I said, my whole life I've been this faith-based person. And I still am. And I'm still in the same faith as I was, but I am a totally different member than I was before. I am such a different member than I was before, such a different practitioner, because the God that I now serve is a capital G God. And not just in name. He's not, that God isn't somebody that when I pray, the words are bouncing off the walls. I now have this two-way communication with this God that gives me what I need. And there's my experience with God. And I hope that's helpful to somebody out there.
It's helpful to me because it answers a question I've often asked myself, which is, so again, I came at this from the sort of agnostic point of view, right? And I always thought that people who were religious, right, who believed in God, even if they maybe weren't active church members or something, but they didn't have as big a mountain to climb as I did, right? Because I had to kind of start it, not at 0, but -5, right? I had to fire my very small conception of God, right? And all the resentments and things that I had, took an entire step forward, second one, to get rid of that, in order to come up with what is a God that is personal to me, to Silvio, right? Because that's the only way that is going to work for me, which is, I think, my way of saying capital G God, right? But I always had this thing kind of going, but if you're coming in, you already believe in God, that's the work kind of done for you. But then I would see that people who do say that they believe in God, that they would still struggle with the program and struggle to stay sober. And you've so brilliantly explained why that would be and how that comes about. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to make one more comment on this because I feel to. If you out there are hung up on the God of your childhood or the perceived God of your friends and extended family, that just, is somebody up there pointing a finger at you and saying, you're not worthy, you're going to hell, I'm looking for every excuse to throw you into hell. That is not a God who will or can help you in this disease.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to fire that God's butt and find a new one that can.
Yeah. It's really powerful. And this has really clarified so many things for me personally here, and I hope it'll reach the ears that need to hear it. You know, that's really brilliant. Religionist was the word that you used. Religionist.
Yes,
Brilliant.
yes, religionist.
Brilliant, thank you. Question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power, or what are your God moments? So it'd be great if you had anything to share there.
Yeah. So, a handful of years ago, I would have said, I experience God when I'm at church, when I'm reading my scripture, when I'm doing these different things. And while I still do that, that is not where I experience real connection with my God. Where I experience real connection with my God is right over here. I have a desk with a candle on it, a notebook of paper, and a couple of pens. And that's where I experience God. I experience God when I walk out my front door and take a walk through the neighborhood in the beautiful springtime when we've got blossoms coming out and the smell of blossoms and the view of tulips and dandelions that are coming up out of the ground after a long, cold, gray winter. That's where I experience God and how I experience God. And I experience God when I'm working one-on-one with another, and in this, with another alcoholic. And that's how I define other people, because the big book is my book of recovery. When I'm working one-on-one with another alcoholic, when they speak to me or when I speak to them, words that I was like, wow, where did that come from?
Right.
That's from God. And that's how I experience God today.
That's a shared experience. I sometimes, particularly when working with a sponsee, things will occur. I will say things and I turn around and think, that really never came from me. I never thought that I would say such things. So yeah, usually anything good that comes out is definitely from upstairs and not from me.
Agreed.
Question 8 is, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? So I'm assuming you have, I know that you just said that you used the book, but I'm assuming there might be other texts that are also part of your fellowship, and maybe the steps are slightly different. Talk us through that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the big book is my primary book. In my fellowship, we also use the 12 and 12 from Alcoholics Anonymous. We also use the white book from Sexaholics Anonymous and another piece of material called Step into Action from Sexaholics Anonymous. Also, SAL has published its own book, which is it's a companion piece. It's not to replace any of those documents. It's to supplement any sort of step study. And in the steps, the only changes in the 12 steps are, in step 1, we admitted we were powerless over sexual addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. And then it's funny, step 12, because of sexual addictions, the closing phrase, and to practice these principles in all our affairs, turns into to practice these principles in all we do.
Yes.
Because affairs has a strange connotation for us sex addicts.
Yeah, quite right.
So those are the only changes in the 12 steps for my fellowship. But the steps that gave me the most trouble initially was step 4 and 5. Because there was no way I was going to admit to anybody, myself included, and God included, my struggles and the things that I had done. And then step 9 is one that I still am really hesitant to. And I've had all sorts of awakenings in my life about this, and I felt good about it, but I still have a hard time with the concept of, excuse me, I still have a hard time with the concept of going and making direct amends with people that I've harmed. And I love the line, except when to do so would injure them or others. But I think sometimes I take that as an excuse. You know what, this is going to injure them or others. It's going to be hard for me. It's going to injure me. So I'm going to hold off on that, you know. But those have been the hard ones. But as I really look at it, the hardest one was step 2. Even though I was, and I talked to you through that a little bit.
Absolutely.
That was painful. When I fired my perception of God, I thought, what am I going to stand on? Am I going to fall and into a bottomless pit and never have connection to anything or anyone again? Am I going to be just a lost soul without any sort of tie to anything but my fellows here? And gratefully, it only took about a week and a half before that capital G God showed up and did that. But that week and a half was hard. And the idea that I'm firing God, does that mean that I've got to step out of this family culture that, once again, I would feel like I would be an outcast or pariah if I stepped away from it and be rejected. But I think that was honestly the hardest one.
It's a very powerful threat, isn't it? Being an outcast, being a pariah. It's odd because what is weird is that this includes me. I've spoken to so many addicts and people who struggle with addiction who on the one hand want to see themselves as different and, like to think of themselves as being sort of very individualistic, this, that and the other on the one hand, and then on the other hand we complain about feeling marginalized. And we have an illness that can marginalize us and does marginalize us and puts us to the side. But from you, you were always really quite happy to be part of it and not be marginalized. So this must have been an extra potent threat for you.
Yeah, I think my whole life has been trying to fit in, to be accepted, and to do anything I could to be accepted. And being marginalized, being disconnected from people is a great anxiety, a great fear in my life. And with that, though, I mean, we read about we could be alone in a room of thousands. I could be at a concert with 30,000 people jumping and screaming and feel absolutely alone and isolated. And yet I'd be surrounded by people that I say I love, that say they love me, and still feel absolutely alone. But if they turn their backs on me, that would be the hardest thing ever, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Question 9 is, which character defects give you most trouble? So we touched a bit on fear here, haven't we, over the last couple of minutes or so. But what else comes to mind for you? Things that might be in the way of your recovery, the character defects.
Yeah, I've got a whole slew of them, but the ones that give me the biggest trouble are avoidance, procrastination, laziness. But avoidance and procrastination and laziness kind of fit in the same circle. Fear, fear of being rejected, absolutely. Those are big ones. And another one, and I think this is fairly universal, is pride. Man, I need to be seen as somebody that's making a difference. And I see that. Let me back up just a little bit on that. I believe that God has given me gifts to be able to help others, has given me a voice and the ability to communicate with people in a way that is helpful. But I can take that and I can twist it so quickly and say, it's me that's doing this. It's me that is the source of this light. And I have to make sure that I am recognizing that I am just a reflector, that I'm letting God's light come in and out, and not drink in the praise, because for whatever reason, it's from a very young age, I've received praise from so many people, and I've drunk it in so many times, and it's just poisoned me. So
you and me both. Pride is a big thing, I think, in all its forms, its shape and sizes. I see the danger in it, and it's something that I struggle with myself in various guises. But it's something that can really get in the way of my recovery as well, because of course it takes away. Pride is very self, isn't it? And it takes away any power that belongs to that power that is greater than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, question 10 is, what is the best thing recovery has given you?
Oh, great question. Recovery's given me a lot of great things. The best thing, though, I think, is real connection. The real connection. I have found I'm home. When I'm in a room of recovery, whether it's an in-person room or a virtual room, I'm home. I see people who are like me and that I'm like them. And I see acceptance, that even though I'm like them and they're like me, we love each other, man. We've got each other's backs. And I think that is the biggest thing that's happened, is connection with others. And through that connection with others, I feel connection with the divine, with God, with the higher power. And that's, I think that's the greatest gift that recovery has given me.
Yeah. There's something to be said for that, isn't there? I mean, the home group, you said it so beautifully. Is feeling at home and being home. It's such a powerful feeling, and it just makes me feel so safe when I experience it.
Agreed. Yes.
Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict? And I'd be quite happy if you didn't mind to make this specific to sex addiction.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to start to one who may not think they're an addict, a sex addict, and we'll go specific there. I can't diagnose you. Hang on, I'm going to go grab my white book because I'm going to read a phrase out of this thing in just a sec. Okay. In the White Book of Sexaholics Anonymous, there's an opening reading that is often used on page 202, and it's entitled, "What is a Sexaholic and What is Sexual Sobriety?" And I'm not going to read this whole page, but I'm going to read a little bit towards the end of it. I'm going to read the whole last paragraph.
Great, thank you.
"This will and should discourage many inquirers who admit to sexual obsession or compulsion, but who simply want to control and enjoy it, much as the alcoholic would like to control and enjoy drinking. Until we had been driven to the point of despair, until we really wanted to stop but could not, we did not give ourselves to this program of recovery. This program of recovery is for those who know they have no other option but to stop, and their own enlightened self-interest must tell them this." So I love that line. In order to diagnose myself as a sex addict, I have to say, do I really want to stop but can't? Am I willing to do whatever it takes and it still doesn't work for me? I need to come into the rooms and I have no other option but to stop because I've burned my life into the ground. I've burned my relationships into the ground. I've been the tornado that's torn through the lives of my loved ones. And I come up out of the cellar and I say, "Ain't it great the wind stopped blowing, Ma?" And my own enlightened self-interest must tell me this. I've got no other choice. My life is a shambles. If you've got no other choice, you might be a sex addict. But only you can determine that by going out and trying more things, you know. Oh, I'll just try one more thing before this. Now to the newcomer. Come identify with us. Come and listen. Sit in a room, sit in multiple rooms of recovery and listen to the stories and come to the point where you say, "I must have this thing. I'm just like them." If you're not just like us, go find what works for you if you're miserable. But one thing I have found is that nobody that comes into the rooms as a newcomer is flying in on wings of eagles. They're crawling in for some reason. It's not because their life's going great and this is just one little problem that I have that I need to fix and everything else will go well. Very rarely does anybody come in like that. Almost everybody comes in crawling, saying, "I'm dying." Yeah. Now, they may not want to be honest about that. I did not want to be honest about that when I first came into the rooms, but I knew that I was dying and I knew that I couldn't do it on my own anymore. Keep coming back and identify. Connect with people. This is the next thing I want to say to the newcomer. Find somebody who has the light laser beams coming out of their eyes, that has what you want, and go grab them. Grab them and say, "I need what you have. What are you doing to get what I want?" And be willing to do whatever it is they're doing so that you can have that same light coming out of your eyes and that same peace.
Yeah. It's very powerful, Justin, very powerful. And there's something there something that I've thought about a few times, and it just reminded me of that, which is that very few people come into the rooms for just to have a look or for a laugh, right? You know, usually by the time people decide to take what is a drastic step, which is to come to a 12-step group, which really for us on the inside isn't a drastic step at all, but of course coming into it, it very much is. When you come in, usually people come in for a good reason. Now, it may not always be the reason that they thought it was, And there might be a few
Right.
other bits and pieces there, but you usually don't come in as a tourist, essentially. Yeah.
Right. You know, can I share about my first
Yeah,
experience going into
please.
the rooms? Okay. So, like I mentioned, my wife had been doing 12-step work for almost 8 years
God.
after she learned of my struggles and my addiction and my disaster in my life. And I was seeing the light turn on in her eyes. She was working the steps. She was sponsoring others. She was doing all these things. She was doing service. And she'd share with me her step work progress. Hey, I'm doing step 4, and here's what step 4 is. And she'd tell me all these different things. And the whole time I'm going, oh, this sounds pretty cool. I don't ever want to do it, you know? And finally, about a month and a half after she came to me at my rock bottom and said, hey, I'm good even without you. I came to her basically crawling and said, all right, I can't do this. Tell me about these meetings. Where do I need to go? And she, to her credit, she kind of laughed and she said, whatever, here's where they are. Do with it what you will. Yeah. And I was determined that I would go to one meeting and be fixed because I can do anything, you know?
Of course.
I'm going to go to this one meeting. I'm going to sneak in. I'm going to sit in the back row. I'm going to listen. And as soon as it's over, I am out of there. And I am never coming back again. And I did that. Thank God that there was a man there. His name is Benjamin. I love him to this day. He's my hero. And as soon as the meeting was over, I jumped up and I was heading out those doors as fast as possible. This guy chased me down. And he said, hey, you are in the right place, and I will see you back here next week. And he issued a challenge. And short man syndrome, you issue me a challenge, I'm not going to back down. Yeah. And within a couple of weeks, for the first time in my life, I said, hey, I'm Justin, and I think I might be an addict. And as soon as I said those words, like this weight lifted off my shoulder. Yeah. And then a couple of weeks later, I said, hey, I'm Justin, and I am a big, fat liar. Another huge weight came off my shoulders. And the same Benjamin comes up to me, he goes, it's time to work the steps, brother. Let's do this. And everything changed at that point. I started getting honest and saying things that there was no way. I'm not an addict. I can't admit powerlessness and unmanageability. And then I'm a dishonest person. So as a newcomer, come in, be willing, be patient, and see what happens.
Yeah. I have to say your wife sounds an absolutely remarkable person. That length of time.
She is. That
length of time working the steps in the Anon group and so on while you're still, as we say, in the madness. It's a remarkable story. Absolutely remarkable. Wonderful. Our last question.
I want to sing her, before we get to that, I want to sing her praises one more time. Just in the last couple of weeks, I had an issue where I needed to talk to somebody about it in my recovery. Sure. And I went to my wife and I said, hey, here's what's going on. What do you think? And this is how awesome she is. She says, I'm not your sponsor. I'm not your higher power. I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah.
And it was said with love, but it was said absolutely straightforward. And I love how she is able to do that and say, you know what? I'm your wife. I love you. I'm here to support you. But those are not wife questions. Yeah. That's for your sponsor and your higher power. Go talk to them.
Well, brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. And speaking of higher power, our question 12. Our last question. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
Wow. I could use a religious term here that's very common in biblical stuff, but I'm not going to do that because that's not how I see it right now. I want my God to take me in his arms and say, thank you, Justin, for imperfectly but diligently reflecting my light of love to others. Yeah, I think that's what I would love to hear my God say to me at the pearly gates.
Beautiful. I have to thank you, Justin. Thank you for your time. I'd like to thank you for your honesty and for your courage to come and speak to me about your process, about your fellowship, and about your personal experience. It's been absolutely brilliant. It's been marvelous. Thank you so much. Before we finish, I'd like to quickly give you a bit of room here to talk about Rico 12. and about your series of brilliant podcasts, which are such a wonderful pillar, I suppose, of recovery in the Zoom world and in the podcast world. And please share a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Silvio. I appreciate that. I had totally forgotten that we were going to come back to that. So I'm grateful that you're given the opportunity. So RICO 12 is a project that was born about 3.5 years, about 3 years ago, I think. And I was a podcaster previous to that, and I did a podcast called Journey Through Life. And I just have long-form conversations with people, everyday people, ordinary people with extraordinary stories. And towards the end of 2019, well, so it's been 4 years. It's almost 4 years that RICO 12 started. Towards the end of 2019, my higher power was just pounding on me. Hey, do a series on each of the 12 steps with people from all over the place. People you don't know who they are. I'll connect you with them, basically, is what it was. And I did this. And I did this series on each of the 12 steps with people from all over the world, different addictions, different backgrounds and everything. And I loved it. And I went back to 2 or 3 more episodes of what I was doing before, and I just felt empty. I was like, no, I've got to get back in the recovery world. And I started looking around at how I could do this, and just this idea of a speaker meeting, a recorded speaker meeting came to mind with people from all addictions, all afflictions, all backgrounds, all faiths, all nationalities, whatever, to share their experience, strength, and hope, and then do a Q&A afterwards. And that's what RICO 12 is we invite a speaker from anywhere, any addiction, any affliction. It's an open meeting to share their experience, strength, and hope on a topic of their choice. And then I ask questions. We have a live audience on Zoom that can also ask moderated questions through me. And it's all done every Friday live at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, United States, Eastern Time, on Zoom. And you can, if you want to participate live, you can. And we'll put something in the show notes here so that
we'll put the links in the show notes, absolutely.
And then, but you can also listen podcast anywhere podcasts are heard by looking up RICO 12. That's RECO 12, like recovery 12-step, RICO 12. And also, so that's the flagship as a speaker meeting. I also record a Big Book Roundtable with 2 fellows who know their Big Book inside and out and have great experience and great energy, with Nikki M. and David G. And they're just fantastic. We sit around a virtual roundtable and discuss. We go from front cover through page 164 in the Big Book and deep dive into it. And then another RICO 12 project is Noodle It Out with Nikki M., where we just take a everyday question that somebody has, a struggle they're having in their recovery, and go to the Big Book and find solutions. And it's just a fun time. RICO 12 has really revolutionized my own recovery. It's opened my eyes so much to the fact that, well, my understanding that addictions of all kinds boil down to the same core. It's the self, the self's will getting in the way. So anyways.
That's great.
Thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure indeed. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you again, Justin, for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. We'll make sure to put links in the show notes, and I hope that you've had as good a time as I have. It's been absolutely a privilege. Thank you.
And thank you, Silvio. You made it very comfortable for somebody who felt like an imposter coming in. I feel welcomed and loved. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not for profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.